they're highlighting something unique about
the character.
About the character of God. So when it comes to femininity, what we see about the woman is that she is the soft one, not that she's weak.
Hello and welcome to the Tabaza podcast, where we bring you truth for a dark world. My name is Mark Sesang, and on behalf of Veracity Fount, I am glad that you've been able to join us today for yet another interesting, wonderful topic that concerns our faith, how we practice our faith, and how we live our faith in light of especially our cultural context and the things that are happening around us. And today with me in the studio is Daphne Byamukama. Daph, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you. This is your first time here. How do you feel?
Nervous, of course.
Everyone feels nervous. I don't know why, but this is like a safe space. This is a nice environment. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And she has really prepared wonderfully for us. And we look forward to hearing what you have to tell us. Would you like to just tell us a bit about yourself?
My name is Daphne Byamukama, and I am married to Dr. Joseph Byamukama.
Medical
PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. It's a pleasure to be working with him as his spouse. Together we have 2 children, Abaho and Avasa Byamukama. So among being a stay-at-home wife and mother, I also teach. There's a community Bible study where I teach the ladies. I get the privilege to work alongside them in mentorship. And more recently, I've also added to my vocations as being a relationship counselor. You can find me at Conscious Connections. Yeah.
I'm sure many people have heard about that Conscious Connections, consciously connecting people in a godly way. This must be interesting. We look forward to hosting you one time to tell us about Conscious Connections.
I would love to tell you about it.
Yeah, we look forward to that. But today you're here for a different topic.
Right.
An interesting one.
Yeah.
Quite relevant for our day.
Yes.
And I would not say controversial, but it's not easy.
It is
Feminism.
Controversial. It is still controversial.
Feminism and hyper-independence of women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess the best place to start is what is feminism? And what is feminism? Where did it come from? The genesis of it all? And
I think we can just begin with the normal way people think about it. The ordinary way in the masses, in the population, it is, women empowerment, getting equal opportunities for women, and, putting the bar up high for women in comparison to men who always had the power.
We've always had it there.
You've always had it. So now
we could always vote, we'd eat the nice pieces of chicken.
Exactly.
And you guys were not allowed to eat chicken.
Right, and eggs and, so many other delicacies. So that is usually the way people think about it. But feminism is more than that. It's not just about equal rights, but it's also a philosophy. It's a worldview, just like atheism, just like postmodernism. It is a philosophy that has its values, it has its ideologies, way of thinking, it has its systematic problem, which it says is the patriarchy, and it needs to be torn down and it needs to be resolved. So that is pretty much what feminism actually is. So how it came about, the whole phenomena began in the 1700s. And within this time, women did not have the right to vote. They were legally tied to their husbands and families. And so one of the things that women highlighted, some of the cultural days of the time, were the inability to vote, that aspect of it. It's called coverture. Coverture is it's a law concept where, as a wife or a woman, you are tied to your husband and your identity is subsumed into the family, and and then the other issue they had was that in schools the boys had the privilege of these awesome sciences like theology, medicine, and and so many others that the women weren't being taught, and they also wanted to be part of the civil duties, or the civil part of the state, and the women, they weren't. So there were several women who led this whole ideology, one of them being Mary Wollstonecraft, who penned The Vindication of Rights of a Woman in England. Then there is another one called Olympe de Gouges in France, who penned The Rights of Women. And then there are the Grimke sisters, who wrote an appeal to the Christian women in the South. And so together there was a convention that came together called the Seneca Falls Declaration of Women's Rights. And after that convention, the whole idea began that we need to stand up for our rights. We need to figure it out. So that was like, so in general, there are three waves. There are three waves of feminism. So there is that, the first one, and then there is the second one in the 1950s that came up, and they take on some of the documentation that was written, and they push it forward. In the 1950s, again, other women rose up and talked about these same issues all over again. And then in 1950, the main person that I can pick up on is Betty Friedan. She was an American journalist. So she picks it up as well. But for her, she uses what she saw as the desperate housewives who are stuck and trapped into the role of being a housewife, and there is nothing else to do. She's like, women should be more educated to get identity outside the home. Yes, but there are many other undercurrents going on, the wars that were happening at the time. Women had already actually started working, given that after the first wave, a lot of laws were changed, divorce laws, schooling, education. So women had already started to make strides forward, but then it kind of slowed down, so it was picked up in the 1960s. So then the third wave is after the pill, after the pill had come out. So it was the first technology that came out, which enabled women to be able to have sex without the consequences.
Oh, the contraceptive pill,
yes. So what we call the sexual revolution. So that is the third wave. So now this
was in the 60s.
Yes, this is like later in the 1960s, but some people like even push it. It goes way into the 1990s. You can hear the songs, you know, Powerpuff Girls and all those things. So they are pushing the agenda. So of course, through all those writers, the philosophy picks up in academia, and then gender studies. Of course, by gender we mean
the LGBTQ
women studies particularly. So that's how it kind of goes forward. And then in the church, there happens to be also that rise up, in the sense that also women were like, well, men have been holding all the keys, and we need
positions of power.
Yes, in the position of power. Yes, yet women are as much as capable as men. So that's when feminism also rose up in the church. So within the church, feminism now feminism is like, it's a whole range. It's really, really a range. But to put ties to it in the church, there are three types of feminists that rose up. So there is the radical feminists. In short, the radicals are the ones who thought the Bible is a patriarchal book. There's nothing for us out there.
The men are trash camp.
Yes, but for them particularly, these are even scholarly women who went to university. They did theology and philosophy, and they kind of come up with their own interpretation. They try to come up with women Bible studies, or where they talk about the female being divine, God being also female. So you hear some of that language. So those were the radicals. Then the second type were the reformed feminists, who for them started with men and women are equal. So we can then use the Bible as we choose. If it says we are equal, we'll take it. If it brings up the differences, we are not taking it.
So they choose what to take out.
So
there's some passages, say maybe like Titus 1, Timothy 3,
those that don't work for us. Okay. So then the last are the evangelical feminists, who are sometimes also called egalitarians. So the egalitarians, for them, say, no, actually, if you read the Bible well enough, it will lead you to the conclusion that men and women are equal and they can share every role. So that's really the type, but there is like more, but pretty much that's how we are here today with the conversation still ongoing between whether, feminism should be encouraged, whether men and women ought to have the same role and play the exact same thing, or there are differences and therefore different roles.
Yeah. So in essence, I guess I think the most popular strand, I would say, that we see is the one which is done with the patriarchy, which is, of course, the men are trash, which for me sounds a bit like Marxism, because Karl Marx, French philosopher, was it French or I think it was, hopefully, I might be confused, but Karl Marx comes and says, basically, to destroy your, find a way of destroying your oppressor.
Yes.
And in this case, a lot of the feminism brand that we see is that kind which is destroy your oppressor. In this case, of course, the oppressor is being the patriarchy.
Yes.
But of course, as you have mentioned, you have those subtle, which are not necessarily seeking, the destroying, to outrightly destroy the men, but in a sense have peeling away some of those things.
Yeah. I think I like you bring up Marxism, because one of the leading thinkers in feminism was called Simeon Duvoir. She believed in existentialism, which is the idea that an individual is a free agent. They should be doing whatever they want, and she actually is one of the founders of feminism. So some people do argue that feminism, the first wave, was actually Christian, but then the second, which was picking off the so-called Christian views, now entirely moved away from Christianity, which is what you see in their thinking, in their thought processes. Like God is not part of their world. Their world is that man is the center and woman happens to be the other. The man is essential and the woman is the other essential. So for them, there is no God in their thinking, but it is man who is determining. So we have to take the power from the man, because we are like shadowing him, and that's not right. So that same thought continues on even Betty Freud and the rest of them in American world. It really doesn't hold any Christian worldview behind it. Yeah.
So of course, for many of them have been riding on scripture and on the Bible, but in your research, in what you found, is it biblical?
Feminism as a whole? Well, when you look at, I think when I look at the issues of that day at that time, let's say the first wave of feminism, there was some issues for sure.
Yeah.
But again, you have to look at how history has come. How did they get where they were getting? How is it that, let's say, the men were in the civical duties and the women were in the home, and what? There is a reasonable explanation for that. It's not men are like, who are our next victim? These ones, you know. So culture moves in a certain way. It moves in a certain way. And yes, there are people who find it problematic and rise up. So I think that's the way in which they rose up, to be able to highlight to their men or husbands that, hey, in your laws, you are not making space for women, and I think you should make space. And the Christian world did make space for them. They did go to schools and things like that. But also the unfair caricature of history, in the sense that women weren't educated entirely, and, you know, that kind of thing. That's
which is something which we've seen not even too long ago. It's something that is just has been present within our very own culture.
Right. So there is this cramming that the men had certain rights entirely that women didn't have, and yet honestly, education was already happening in certain aspects, and depending, even again, I usually argue that culture also determines the educational needs of the people. And so as the needs increase, the education will keep rising up. And, you know, so, but going back to your question, I would say that the first wave had some genuine concerns that were dealt with. Now, as the waves kept on increasing, the farther away they went from scripture. And I think we are in the worst version of feminism, the worst, because it kind of empowers the woman to think about herself, to think about what she can earn and get all these rights for herself. Look at this, the what has come out of the sexual revolution, for example. How it has literally removed morality out of the whole question, because we are fighting hard to be heard, to be seen, to be known. It's like a power play. So it gets worse, and it isn't biblical, really. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does it differ from femininity? Because you have, of course, the tendency for for men who have no idea about what feminism is, who are just maybe hearing about it, may think, we need, since there are women are rising up, we need to
suppress
to crush them. Yes. But then there's an aspect where the Bible speaks about femininity, which is different from feminism. Yes. How do the two?
So like I began, feminism is a worldview. Femininity has more to do with the essence of one gender, one of the two genders. And so now, depending on which worldview, each worldview defines femininity differently. If you come to tradition, there is what they define what femininity is. Femininity has to do with the essence of being a woman, a biological female who can nurture a home, who can support her husband, who gives birth, and the ability to bond and create all these emotional relationships and build a home. So, but then when you look at Genesis, all that is true, and yet femininity, in light of the biblical worldview, is that it points to God. When both genders come together, they're highlighting something unique about
the character.
About the character of God. So when it comes to femininity, what we see about the woman is that she is the soft one. Not that she's weak, but she is the soft one. She's the one with the maternal ability to reproduce, to give birth, the ability to make a home. And again, in contrary to what God intends when he says that blessing the man and the woman, we see the reality that the mission that God has given them, the commission that God gives them to multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, it is impossible without the woman. Yeah. So that reflection, or even just going back to the fact that the woman as well being the helper, doesn't make her any less than the man, but she's reflecting the aspect of God being a helper. So all the things that femininity stands for, they shadow and highlight a part of who God is in a way that a man cannot. So a woman having the ability to do all those things, even without them playing out, a woman is still a woman, even when they have not given birth, even when they are not married. They still have the ability to do all those things in a way that is glorifying and pleasing God. So it's not just for our own sake, but it's our made to reflect and shadow back who God is.
Okay. So obviously, femininity, as the first wave came, and indeed it does have some good aspects, because women, even within our African context and culture, they were put down as though they were second-class citizens, which the Bible doesn't really
stand for.
So how then does the Bible describe this equality between men and women? How does it bring it out? Of course, in contrary to what feminism does, but how does it bring it out? Okay.
So I think first and foremost, going back to Genesis 1:27, God said, "Let us make man in his image." So male and female, he created them. So that's the question we are going through with our kids. How and why did God create you? The New City Catechism. And it says that God made us male and female in his own image to glorify him. So the fact is that man and woman are both image bearers. No one is less than the other. So there is that equality that is bound in both genders in our status before God. Of course, that carries the connotation again in Christ that we are both co-heirs with Christ. That famous verse in Galatians 3. There's neither Jew or Gentile, male or female. So it is talking about our standing before God as co-heirs of salvation. So the first commission again for creation, the creation mandate, we share the same responsibility, and together both genders fulfill that role. Same thing even when we come to kingdom work, both men and women have that privilege to preach the gospel, to teach others, and to share it equally. The other thing that we also have to remember is that we are both sharers in sin.
Yeah, true.
So the sinful nature is not just in the one gender, but we both share it, and that's why we have a common solution, which is Christ himself. And so he dies for both men and women. So the value and dignity as well that men have is equally the same. The capabilities that men have, they also have. Women also do have them, the ability to think, the ability to reason, the ability to stand, and we have the same. That equality is the same. Though of course they look different depending on the relationship between the man and the woman. So those are a couple of similarities that I would highlight.
Okay. So obviously many feminists have claimed the Bible and God as misogynistic. So is God misogynistic, or does it treat women as second-class citizens? Because they look at some of the biblical say prohibitions, especially elders and things like that. And of course also because the Bible was written in a culture that was patriarchal, the Jewish culture. And so you see how, an example, the story of this woman who's brought before Jesus committing adultery, the man is nowhere to be seen.
Yes.
And so many of them have accused God of being a misogynist. Is God that the kind of God as they portray him? And if not, why? How different is he from what they try to portray him?
No, I think I believe God is not misogynistic, but man can be. Okay, man is guilty of being classist. The ability to kind of find that these people are better than others. And that's what I see is the trend in human history. Now, I've just been reading from a book called The Secular Age by Charles Taylor. And he talks about how we've gotten to where we are in terms of individualism. And he highlights the community aspect of a lot of societies back in that day. And there are many natural law theories that come out on how things operate, on how creatures behave, how society should be ordered and things like that. There is the Platos who write the Republic and so many others who come up with how do you come up with social order. So as a lot of these theories come out, there is a sense in which they define the world, how society should run. And I find that sometimes, you would say, in some situations, you could say that there's a way men started to look down on women, So there was this understanding. So one of the theories I came up with was the hierarchical complementarianism, in the sense that there were things that are seen to complement each other, like the sun and the moon. Like imagine if the sun doesn't come out, that would totally mess up the moon. You get many things. They looked at the world and they were able to see this undeniable way in which the world worked, which part of which was complementariness. So in that sense, man and woman understood themselves in that regard, that woman has her place and the man has his place. Now, as modernists, that sounds like that trashy language, like hierarchical and things like that. But these are people who came up with an understanding of how the world operates. And I think we are looking at natural law. Psalms 19 says the heavens declare the glory of God, and the earth reveals his handiwork. So there are things embedded in nature that reflect how society should run, that are good. And yet, because these theories are being brought up by men who are sinful, they tend to miss certain things, So I think the reality that man and woman need to work as partners, it kind of gets in the shadow that now women start to feel like we are the other sex, So the aspect that men have to play the civil duty of going out, hunting, making sure that the empire stands, fighting, war, and all these things are absolutely necessary to civilization.
Yeah.
And so the women as well understood themselves as we are part of this civilization, and we contribute by supporting our husbands, making sure our children are well kept, making sure that there's food. Now, let's not think picking food from the supermarket. Like, there is everything we have right now as a privilege. Those people work hard. Yes.
Exactly.
Like gardening, there is seasons. Now think of Europe where they have like 4 seasons. I was
actually about to say that I can't imagine women back then complaining. We want to go hunting.
Yes. Because they understood their place, because they saw the balance, you know. And we would even kind of look at that balance in Genesis, for example. Theologians would say that when you look at the creation account in Genesis 1 alone, the first 3 days, one of them said you look at God forming the earth, you see the earth, things being separated,
the water
and then they are being filled. What God forms, then he fills it with the sun, the moon, the plants, the animals. So you see that complementariness there, which is a lot of what the natural law theorists came up with. But over time, there's this thing of looking down on the woman, and there are theories that started to purport that. One example is the more recent one is social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is the one that's responsible for the colonial experiment. So it highlighted that men are stronger, therefore they easily evolve. So imagine that kind of theory. And the women, they are the weaker species because they are at home taking care of children. You see that? So then it brings in that classism. So when you see that, it kind of now starts to stir up people to think, well, what I'm doing at home is meaningless. What is meaningful is out there. To go and work and, yet.
So raising children,
taking care of the home.
Being, as Titus chapter 1 says, a good home manager, those are now frowned upon.
Yes, those are now frowned upon. And so now what the vocations to look up to are the ones that the men are doing. And also, yet, even just looking at that, the home setting was also the workplace. There's so much that the women were doing from their home, so much that we can't even, it's all lost to history. Now it's this whole corporate or work thing that now we
hire people to take care of our homes.
Exactly. So we are both going out now. We are both doing, so the whole we can't do it all. Everyone is doing everything. Even denying the basic differences is in the name of equality. So we are losing so much at the cost of gaining. But going back to your question, that being misogynistic is a man thing, man and woman, like just those theories that come
as
up
result
of sin. Yes, the pattern. And I also think that it goes back to the fall, the curse that God says that man will dominate. That's very negative language. He will dominate. And
her desire will be to...
Yes, exactly. So you see that power play continuing on, that throughout human history. And I think it's going to continue, where the one gender feels like, the other one is better. And we didn't have to do that. So it's the sinful heart of man to continue to come up with these theories where one is better than the other.
So Galatians 3:28 says that we are all equal. So some feminists would argue that this is what we are pursuing, but is that really what they are pursuing?
So you have to be careful with how terms are defined. We can say equality, and yet we mean totally different things. So the way they define equality in that regard is that roles are entirely removed between men and women. So it's the same, and they will highlight the fact that because there's neither male and female, so then that distinction is not there. Everyone is a leader. Both of us are leaders. Both of us should do the same thing. That's what they mean.
So can I give back?
That's a good
because
question.
as in if we remove the roles, as in remove the roles, we are all equal. Whatever you can do, I can do. I've not seen many women running downtown, asking for jobs. You know those trucks that deliver cement.
Yes.
I think it's in there. As in, there's just some basics like. I think Peter writes in 1 Peter 3. Women, in a sense, are the weaker vessel, and it's talking about, in a sense, the physical aspect of it.
Yes.
Not that they are weaker in spirit or anything like that, but there are just some things women may not be able to. As a man, I can't give birth. As a man, I would be a terrible, as in, you try to be a good father, but the nurturing aspect is women's.
Yeah, they would not deny that, but now if you bring it, I think that becomes like background noise. For them, the focus is our utopia is that we want to see more women, for example, preaching, because they will tend to, they kind of hold, for example, the evangelical feminists, they will hold on to scripture being inerrant, but at the same time they will say it was written in patriarchal days, so the culture was dictating how the scriptures were being written. And they will also hold on to female leaders like Deborah. I think Esther, yes, those are Esther. Their favorites. Then they'll hold on to, there's Phoebe, they'll hold on to Priscilla, and so many of, and say, see, Priscilla was running around in the different churches on behalf of Paul. Paul calls her a partner with her husband. So, it's leadership is not about hierarchy. It is about sameness. It's about laying down your life for others, which both men and women can do. And then also they would say that there is the hierarchy. They also say the hierarchy comes after the fall, not before. That is their argument. Really.
So has the fall been undone?
So they would say the fall has been undone by Christ, and when you look, and then they will also highlight Christ's leadership is totally different by the patriarchy. You see that Christ did not have the biases. For example, clearly the apostles had very real biases towards women. Look at John 3. So you see the way Jesus talks to women and is kind to them, and he kind of supersedes his culture, and he has undone that hierarchy. He has undone those attitudes. So we should have them removed, and they'll hold on to even more verses like Ephesians 5, where it says submit one to another before all husbands. They will really hold on to that verse and say, no, it says submit one to another. That's what it says. So men should be submitting to women. Women should be submitting to men. In the leadership is not about hierarchy, people. It is about serving one another, and both men and women.
So if the curse has been undone, why do women still have birth pangs?
So those are really good questions, and they are spot on, because that's exactly, like, you cannot get rid of the differences between the genders. You cannot. And even Paul, in many of his commands, he highlights the creation order in First Timothy, in First Corinthians. Yes. So they really do a lot of gymnastics, as my husband puts it, when it comes to those passages that are very clear about the differences. That, for example, Adam was formed first. He is the first. He is the first. He is the first son of creation, but he's highlighting who Christ is. That foreshadowing of Christ, they ignore all of that. It's not, doesn't play in their theology.
Because I'd also think that if Christ is undoing what they say was done by the fall, then he should have had female apostles. He had the women around him helping, and I think the way I would understand it is, it shows us that women do play a role in the gospel message, in preaching the gospel, in taking care of, as in ministry. But then you don't have any woman who's an apostle.
They would still hold on to that. One of them, I read, I have a book here, Jesus and the Feminists. It's a well-written book, and she gives examples of all these arguments. One of them being Ida Spencer. For her, she actually says there is some women were actually apostles of Christ. she highlights that.
Does she give any biblical
And
backing?
she mentions Junia in Romans. There's a name there in Junia, which is debated in the scholarly world.
Yeah.
Was he a man? Was he a woman? And it goes back and forth, but the burden of proof is on them, that it was a woman, because it's debated that she was a woman, so that he is a woman. So that those are some of the arguments, really. But they'll highlight, for example, in Luke, you see the women who served Christ and took care of his needs. So they would incorporate and say, hey, these were also part of the group. So when you say that the apostleship of the 12 is also reflective of the 12 tribes, and again, Revelations, where there's the 12 elders, they kind of dismiss that and say, no, actually, there were women who are in the crowd and who have apostleship, because for them it's about service. It's about service, not hierarchy or the creation order whatsoever.
Okay. Yeah. So I think one of the things that we cannot run away from is, while yes, feminism does have its issues and may not be necessarily supported biblically, women do have, I guess, genuine concerns that for a long period of time, say, people may have, this culture and society may have suppressed them.
Yes.
And we see many of those, as in where the church has gone, you see in many cases, it leads to, it has helped women. So the question then I would ask is, how does the Bible then address the needs and concerns of women that led to the rise of feminism? Because feminists, obviously, some of them think the Bible does not address their concerns. But how does the Bible then address those concerns, that the concerns and the needs that women have?
The Bible restores, or it reminds the leaders that both men and women have equal dignity, and they ought to have human rights. Now, the aspect of human rights is not invented outside a Christian world. There's a lady who writes the case against the sexual revolution. She says that for her, she's of the view that feminism is a Christian idea, because it would never have happened in the grounds, let's say, of Islam at all. It would never. So when you look at the world...
Actually, today, you don't even see feminism taking root in that society.
So, right. So when you look at Christianity, even in its teachings, Christianity is for fighting where there is oppression, where there is a certain group that has been overstepped. So the Bible restores the dignity of women, and we see this in the ministry of Christ himself, and even in their participation in the mission. So just to remind the people or the men of the culture that women have the same and equal dignity, which again, Christ is not coming up with something new. Again, it's in Genesis 1, it's clearly written that they are all made in God's image. So that restoration of human dignity. The other thing I would say is that when it comes to human rights, one of the human rights, of course, is education. Yeah. So education is still is accessible to girls, not because of feminism, but because of Christianity. Because even look at the schools in Uganda. We have girls' schools, missionary schools, Gayaza, and all these other Namagungas. All these are from Christian mission. Okay. So perhaps what feminism does fight for, in light of women having access to all these other schools classes of studies like medicine and all these other things, they push for that. But we have to remember that in the context of church history, for example, you find that so there were two ways in which to play a crucial role in the world for a woman. Either you get married and have children, or you go to a nunnery. So there was an option. So the church did give an option. So if the women didn't want to get married, they would go to a nunnery. Actually, nunneries were like the schools of the day, and some of them are even said to have produced very good emperors who are well taught in Christianity and many other subjects. So those were the options. So Christianity has done its best to encourage education for both men and women. But also when it comes to feminism and saying we need to educate the girl child, yes, that doors were opened to everyone to access education, but still they were able to access education because there were Christian schools that were available. And yes, the culture now had need for all these subjects to be studied and whatnot. So there is the sense in which the Bible does, the Christianity and the Bible reflects the image or the dignity of the woman. So, and then also there is also the aspect of in different cultures where there were ways in which women were degraded. You'd find Christian missionaries fighting against that. Think about India, where there were sacrifices where women would be killed with their husbands. For example, the moment your husband dies, you're supposed to be burnt in the fire.
You're put in with him.
Yes, you're put in with him to honor him.
Yeah.
Or things like throwing away baby girls and whatnot. You find that missionaries did come to save those girls. There is Amika Michael who did that kind of work.
Yeah.
So the church has been at the forefront in participating in where the culture goes.
Yeah.
And not only stories of male missionaries, but also female missionaries who cared about the women and the children and what was happening. So much as perhaps these stories are not told, they're not told at the forefront of news. So that's why it looks like the church has always been dormant
or
and
patriarchal.
Yes, or patriarchal.
Part of the problem.
And yes, there are so many women in church history that have done enormous feats for the Lord. I even think about, I can't help but think about Perpetua in North Africa, who died for the faith. And she was a nursing mother at the time. So you look at those examples, and the church has actually raised the dignity of women far more than any other institution.
I actually have a quote here by Jewish historian Josephus, who writes about women. He says, "From women let no evidence be accepted because of the levity and temerity of their sex." So in the Jewish culture at the time of his writing, they never accepted the witness of a woman. Yes, of a woman. And yet, who are the people who discover the tomb of Jesus? It's actually women. Yes. So you see, in that sense, the Bible and Christianity restoring the dignity of women throughout the ages, not treating them as second-class citizens. But Galatians 3:28 that we've looked at, showing that there's neither male nor female, as in all are equal before God. There's none who's greater. They have different roles, yes, here on earth, but you cannot say men are more spiritual or
Yes. You've actually reminded me, one of the accusations that some of the feminists came up with were those that you see that Jewish attitude. There is that famous prayer, I'm sure you've heard of it. I thank God I'm neither a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. Yes, so they pull on those kinds of examples. But someone else responded by saying that, look at Paul of Tarsus. Perhaps that was his attitude. But when he says that women should not teach, it's not that he's borrowing from the cultural aspect, but he's even writing in a culture where sexual immorality is pervading. And there are pagan religions where women were priestesses cutting hair and also many things. So
the whole of being part of Ephesus breaks down the whole cultural argument, because Ephesus wasn't the culture where men, their supreme goddess Diana, where they rioted. Men rioted because Diana was being.
There was actually such a liberal culture, so liberal as we are now. So liberal as we are, and even just a bit of this. So there's some history I found that Augustus had a problem. One of the Caesar Augustus came up with some laws to manage the morality at that time, because people were running wild and the population was going down. So they come up with these laws where they are forcing people to marry. You are penalizing widows who are not married and things of that nature. So in the context of all of that, just seeing people running wild with pleasure and all sorts of things. Paul is saying that, hey, older women teach younger women, for example, to love their husbands, to take care of their homes. He's trying to keep them busy so that they elevate the gospel, so that they are ready to use whatever opportunity they have to present the gospel in contrast to the wild culture in which they were finding themselves. So I found that historical facet interesting, because it's very easy to just read the patriarchal aspect of the
especially
whole
if it's
culture.
all you have been told and
Yes,
heard of without
yes,
necessarily
yes.
understanding the context.
Yeah, and also maybe just to add that the other thing that how Christianity responds some of these issues is highlighting the quality of leadership that men who are given charge, how they ought to lead, whether it is their families, whether it is the church. So there is so patriarchy now has been clearly owned by feminism. So when you say patriarchy, it's not a good word. So, so you have to avoid it. So the other word that is now used is patricentrism, which means the leadership of men in a way that is God honoring. So you find a lot of people who stand for the gender different, male, female differences using that word. But again, to highlight that where there has been abuse, where there has been shepherding that is less than ideal, then the shepherds that are in charge, that the Lord has trusted with the leadership of families and churches, then should be mindful to lead well. So I think that is highlighted again, because how have we been leading? How have we been mindful of the women around us? So that I think has been a way to help or to tackle some of the issues. And I love Tim Keller's quote that if Christianity is true, it will always be correcting or offending you somewhere. So the church is always reforming. And I think whenever the culture says these are really issues the church needs to tackle, the church must come on its knees and ask and pray for repentance and ask for renewal of mind to change the way it is going about its leadership, the way it's presenting the gospel, so that we have a biblical stance when we say male leadership. How is it doing? Because if it's not doing well, it's like, we told you, the patriarchy. This is exactly what we were saying. But if we are seeing honest men of good repute leading their families and homes, then you have no excuse.
Okay, this has been really wonderful and informative. Thank you very much, Daph. We definitely look forward to hosting you here for another interesting topic, probably conscious connections and hearing more about what you're doing. But thank you very much for being with us. And again, to our listeners, to those watching us, thank you very much for being part of us. Please do like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you may get notified when we do have a new episode, and also that you may share it with others. As I said, we do this to basically help us to understand what it is that we're being called into the Christian faith, how to live our Christian faith in a godly manner. And we do hope that this has been very helpful. If you do have any topics that you would like us to tackle, to discuss here, please you can put something in the comments, or you can drop us an email. Our email address should be on the screen. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.